Introduction. Chess is one of the world's most famous strategy games that has been loved around the world since its inception. The aim of the game is to checkmate your opponent by making moves to capture your opponent's king, by getting your pieces in the king's line of sight, blocking any way of escape your opponent intends to make, whilst also preventing your opponent's pieces from protecting the king. Each side has 8 pawns and a pair of each of the major pieces: 2 horses, 2 bishops, 2 castles, 1 king, and 1 queen. By using the pieces on the board together with a strategy, you'll be much more likely to find success in chess. Chess is a game of learning and implementing strategy and utilizing pattern recognition, along with many other principles to find a way to checkmate your opponent first. By learning the basic rules to chess and consistent practice, your chess skills over time will improve, and you will be able to outplay your opponent and win a chess game. The best chess players are those that practice every day. By playing chess regularly, you will be much more familiar with the most common styles of play, making it easier to recognize patterns in the game. The first thing to familiarize yourself with when learning how to play chess would be the chessboard, the pieces used in the game, and how to use them. Once you are able to recognize the different chess pieces and how they move, you'll be one step closer to being able to understand how chess is played. Chess is played on an 8x8 board consisting of 64 squares. The board is separated by the length and width into ranks and files. The horizontal rows are called the files, and the vertical columns are called the ranks. The ranks are numbered from 1 to 8, and the files are lettered from A to H. The board is usually divided into alternating black and white squares, but can be any alternating light and dark color, or sometimes even plain, simply separated by squares. The rook or the castle. Each player should have 2 castles, and they should be placed in each side at the back row or file. Rooks have a value of 5 points in chess. The bishop. Each player should have 2 bishops, and they should be placed at the third to last square next to the king and queen on each side of the board. Bishops have a value of 3 in chess. The knight or the horse. Each player should have 2 knights, and they should be placed at the second to last square next to the castle on each side of the board. Knights have a value of 3 in chess. The king. Each player should have 1 king, and the king should be placed on the back file next to the bishop, with the king being in a square opposite to his color. The king is the most powerful piece in chess and is priceless in value. The queen. Each player should have 1 queen, and the queen should be placed on the back row next to the king. The queen should also be placed in a square matching the color of the piece. For example, a black queen should be placed in a black square, and a white queen should be placed in a white square. Hence the term queen on her own color. The queen is the second most powerful piece next to the king and has a value of 9 in chess. The pawn. Each player should have 8 pawns, and they should be placed on the second to last row of the board in the squares directly in front of the major pieces. Pawns have a value of 1 in chess. Calculating how much each chess piece is worth. By calculating the numerical value of the pieces you're able to capture during the game, you will be able to work out who has the most material advantage. It would be wise to try to capture your opponent's pieces that are worth the most, as the highest valued pieces tend to do the most damage during the game. It's common to sacrifice lower valued pieces in order to protect the higher value pieces. However, there are some instances in the game where sacrificing higher valued pieces can ultimately allow you to gain an advantage, either short-term or long-term, in the right circumstances. So stay vigilant for any opportunity to take you one step closer to delivering a checkmate to your opponent. How to use the different chess pieces. Now that you're familiar with the chessboard and the pieces used in the game, it's time to learn how to use them when playing chess. The pawn moves 1 square forward at a time, but can move 2 squares on its first move. The pawn can only capture another piece if it is in the square diagonal to it. The queen can move into any square traveling forward, backwards, sideways, and diagonally, as long as there are no pieces blocking the path. The king can move 1 square at a time in any direction. The castle can move forward and backwards and sideways as far as it may, as long as its path is not obstructed. The knight moves 2 squares forward or backwards and 1 square to the left or right, making a L shape. The bishop can travel diagonally in any direction as far as needed, as long as its path is clear. Playing the game. When learning how to play chess, the first rule to remember is that the white pieces get to move first. An important point to also remember is that the first move in the game for both sides is as important as the move that delivers the checkmate. Not only should you think a few moves ahead, but you should aim to control the center of the board as soon as possible to gain the advantage. The whites will have a slight advantage because of this, but ultimately, the player that's able to use all the pieces together synergistically with the most strategy will win the game. Each player should take turns moving one piece at a time in order to find a way to checkmate the opponent. Playing chess is a game of strategy and planning. The best chess players think many moves ahead in order to estimate their opponent's most likely move and their best response. Being able to think abstractly about strategic moves that you can make in the game will benefit you, as it will allow you to find moves in the game that may be of strategic importance as the game progresses that may not have been feasible in the previous moves in the game. Capturing pieces. To capture an opponent's pieces, you need to have a piece that's traveling path is in the direction of the piece you want to capture. For example, for a knight to capture a pawn or any other piece, it has to be in the knight's finishing square once the move is complete. The knight will then be able to capture the piece in the square it needs to land in by replacing the captured piece with the knight and occupying the square. When playing chess, it's important to protect your pieces, especially the major pieces such as the queen, the castle, the bishop, and the knight. The pawns need to be protected also, but not as much as the major pieces previously mentioned, and will likely be sacrificed during the game in order to gain a short-term advantage. The king's protection is of the utmost importance, and the exposure of the king to the opponent will result in a check. The more of your opponent's pieces that you capture, the harder it will be for them to deliver a checkmate. The king, the queen, the bishop, and the rook can capture the opponent's pieces as long as the opponent's piece is in its path. The pawn can only capture the opponent's piece if the opponent's piece is diagonally in front of it. En passant means in passing in French. To capture pawns with the en passant rule, your opponent needs to move their pawn 2 squares on the first move, so that their pawn is next to your pawn after you'll be able to respond in an unusual way, by instead of moving your pawn forward as is the standard move or diagonally forward. When capturing another piece, you will be able to move your pawn in the space behind your opponent's pawn in order to capture it. However, you can only do an en passant move immediately after your opponent moves his pawn in such a way that leaves an en passant open. In other words, the opportunity to take an en passant will be gone by your next move if it is not taken the moment the chance arises. What is castling in chess? Castling is when you have cleared the king's back file of all the pieces apart from the castle on either the king's side or the queen's side, and you intend to gain a strategic advantage by allowing the king and the castle to switch sides. Usually performed as a defensive maneuver at the right time, it can give you an offensive advantage. To castle, move your king 2 spaces to the right or left and place the rook from the side you're castling from on the opposite side of the king. You will not be able to castle if your king was in check in its previous turn, or if castling would put your king in check by your opponent. You also will not be able to castle if any of the squares needed to castle are in the line of sight of your opponent's pieces and are under attack. Getting a pawn to the other side of the board. If you're able to get your pawn to the opponent's back file, congratulations, you're now able to replace your pawn with any piece on the board, giving you an extra advantage in the game by allowing you to have more powerful pieces to accomplish your goal of delivering a checkmate to your opponent. It's possible to have multiples of the same pieces on the chessboard because of this rule. For instance, you may have multiple queens or knights or castles or any piece on the chessboard depending on how many pieces you're able to get to the other side of the chessboard. Delivering a check. To check your opponent, any of your pieces needs to have your opponent's king in their line of sight, in which case the king would have to move into a safe square before they will be able to move any other piece except to block the path of the king in check. Delivering a checkmate. To checkmate your opponent, you need to position your pieces in a way that places your opponent's king in check and prevents their king from moving and any other piece from blocking the path to the king. Once the king has been checkmated, the game is over, so protect your king at all costs.